must be at the castle. And this is one of its earlier wall corners. Here another corner and a wall. Early in the 17th century, the warlord of Kikawa family built this, but then 7 years later the castle was demolished when the Tokugawa shogunate ordered it demolished, but reconstructed in the mid-20th century. The shogun had the power to play his warlords one against the other, the same way that Louis XIV did, and is able to order such a structure demolished as a threat to the shogun. So according to this, the shogunate policy was even more specific. You weren't allowed to have more than one castle in each state. And they had already one, so this is why it was ordered to be torn down. Here are two swords. What kind they were, I don't know. There were many different kinds of swords. Some worn over the back, smaller ones worn in your sash in the front. Maybe even had large ones that were for ceremony, and that may be what these are. They're kind of unwieldy if you think about it. These swords are missing the handle off them, but I think it's in Kill Bill 1 movie. They have a rather exhaustive portion, or at least a portion, on the making of either Japanese or Chinese swords. The reconstruction is simply to illustrate that wouldn't even be close to what would normally have been here, I can't imagine. And in their country, it's swords that made the legend, not the Winchester 73 or the Colt pistol. Was the sword. And those small ones, I don't know if those were one of the pair that were the samurai was allowed to wear, and only the samurai. It's an interesting pike with that rod through it to keep it from going too deep into something. And the same thing function there, but at least that gets more penetration than that other one. Talking about. Okay, so here's the deadly end of it. Yikes. And look at that one up there, this cross. Sharpened probably on all edges. That's probably the scabbard for it too. Yeah, you wouldn't want to run around poking your friends with it. And these weapons probably introduced, I'm not sure what their era is, but sometime after the 1600s when the Dutch came, the Portuguese, but that looks like a blunderbuss, the one in the middle. You have to turn the tide in some battles, I read in Tosin's book. It's an old watercolor, it looks like. Maybe people playing, that's not the same bridge though. This almost looks like it has graduations, but I don't think that's what those are for. It may illustrate the process, or at least the stages of the process of creating a sword. I don't know. These two pictures are interesting because it seems to illustrate an aqueduct with the capacity, when necessary, to dump an excess of water that might be coming down. What a beautiful sight. These just look like spear points, but it gives us an idea of how deeply they were embedded in the shaft. I have no idea what these are. Geological artifacts? Here's the smaller blade. Remember, just like our cowboys, maybe more so because the culture had been around longer, 700 years total. They knew how to use each of these. In other words, the strategies involved. And they're one of their great masters, who I have the name of in my records, actually went to a cave at the very end of his life and wrote out 5 books on the strategy of sword fighting. and then died. Well, I don't know if I'll get to see the white snakes, but there they are. Don't know what these various stones are for. Don't know whether they represent sources of metal or just interesting religious icons. Certainly they're on its own little pedestal. Maybe they're meant to be desktop versions of the same kind of things we see like outside corporate headquarters and at other shrines and in just neighborhoods. Some examples of covered bridges. Revered in our country also. Notice the beautiful woodwork. I mean, the sheen of that work, particularly if it's like it was in that grand hall at the Kochi Castle, where the man said it took 150 hours of hand rubbing to get that sheen. Sure is a beautiful bridge wherever it is. I have no idea what these structures are beneath. Perhaps some of the original detail for the corners or the ridge poles. There, the corner piece, it looks like. The imaginary fish. Here, a beautiful wooden replica of the bridge. Some old paintings of the original bridge, perhaps. This looks like a photograph of them completing construction at one of the ends. Could these men have imagined that they would gain a limited bit of immortality? Can you imagine the kinds of wounds that these would inflict? God, it's horrifying. This looks like a woodblock print of the bridge. There, the classic rising sun symbol. Guessing those pylons on the right represent former bridges, wouldn't you think? Don't know what the relevance of the scroll is. But at least you could study this boat and get an idea of something about boats. Interesting. It's the first time in my travels, I believe, I've seen a bowl of any size, but it's certainly a large bowl with 4 handles. Obviously designed for 2 people to carry. Unless it was really heavy, but I'm assuming 2. And here's some example of wood blocks. You can still buy sets of wood block printing devices today. I've seen them in the shops, both in English and probably, oh, for sure, in Japanese. Don't know who this is, but we get a little idea from the photograph of the authentic dress. Don't know what this regalia here is. This is probably the typical warrior's outfit. Armor, they would call it. This not so much armor, although the head helmet would be, but rather to identify the individual as to rank or personage. Is that a metal mask, it seems like? And the carapace, probably of metal. And I think the plating is made of those individual pieces that are tied together, but I think they're of flattened metal. And these probably have a thick weave. You wonder if they were sufficient to stop one of those razor-sharp swords. Same thing with these thigh leggings, if you will, and ankle leggings and knee coverings. Notice how they simulate what we use in sports. Here's some deadly looking devices, but notice they have on the end metal balls on a chain. Did they swing these to maybe injure or to entrap the the person they were attacking before they could get to him and cut him? Maybe this is where they get that strange plinking sound in their music. Western revolver. This floor seems dedicated to these various swords and their scabbards and these various stones, larger ones that we've seen. It's hard for my generation to appreciate the centuries in which a sword all over the world was the weapon. That and knives have always been a weapon. These are various other castles. Okayama Castle, which town that I stopped in, changed trains coming from Kochi. The Matsue Castle. Here's the Kuchi Castle. I don't know if they mean Kochi. Takematsu Castle. This is the most famous castle, the Himeji Castle, but it's apparently undergoing extensive renovation and suggested that don't even go, so I'm skipping that. This castle, the Osaka Castle, which I won't see, but notice that kind of gold or brass embellishment, which is rare. If this in fact was a handle or some device that you use to hang it up somewhere. This is the Hikone Castle, which I will visit when I go to Kyoto. This castle is the Ueno Castle. I guess that would have been in Tokyo, or may still be. It is interesting when you look at them how they have a different feel, a different look to them. This one dominated by white. This is the Gifu Castle, which is a prefecture that contains, I believe, Megumi and Samago. But notice it has a different, even defensive slots than the rest of them have. A couple of short, stubby knives or swords with a very pretty scabbard, it looks like. When you look closely at these stones, or even not closely, just glancing at them, you see differences which could aesthetically allow a person to empathize with a particular one as an icon in their life. This one a little bit different. This one is interesting because it's narrow and tall and kind of pretty in a strange way. Notice how it contrasts with this completely flat one and not completely, but this relatively flat one and innocuous. Nothing terribly interesting about it.